unleashing female power.
Being a disruptor.
I'm always constantly telling the truth.
I love
art. That's all her life.
She's alive and female.
Being a woman, what it meant.
Prove him wrong.
Girls run the world.
We're rocking the place.
Welcome to the Art Pod. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'll be your guide through this Pandora's box. Strap yourselves in for a journey through the art world where we bring you candid conversations, untold stories, uncover industry secrets, and celebrate the women who are shaping its future. Because in the Art Pod, the spotlight is always on the girls. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Art Pod. My guest today is Maura Reilly. Welcome.
Thank you.
So a little bit about Maura. She is the director of the Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers University. She has held several leadership positions in the arts, including as executive director of the National Academy of Design and as a senior curator at the American Federation of Arts. She is the founding curator of the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, where she developed and launched the first exhibition and public programming space in the U.S. devoted entirely to feminist art. While there, she organized several landmark exhibitions, including the permanent installation of Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party and the blockbuster Global Feminisms, co-curated with Linda Nochlin, among others. Reilly has curated dozens of exhibitions internationally with a focus on marginalized artists and social justice concerns, including, most recently, transfeminism, co-curated with Daria Khan, Jennifer Magby, and Christine Ian, which premiered at Mimosa House in London in 2024, followed by the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art in 2025. Reilly has also authored several books on global contemporary artists and has also written extensively on curatorial practice, including Curatorial Activism Towards an Ethics of Curating, which was published by Thames and Hudson in 2018, which has received many accolades, including a listing as one of the top 10 best art books of 2018 from the New York Times. Her next book, Museums and Social Justice, is forthcoming from Thames and Hudson in 2025. Reilly received her MA and PhD in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University. Opening February 1st, 2025, at the Zimmerli Art Museum is Indigenous Identities, Here, Now, and Always, curated by artist Jaune Quick-to-See Smith, which spotlights the multiplicities of Indigenous art and art-making practices through more than 100 works by 97 Native American artists. Years in the making, the exhibition has been a shared dream of Jaune and Maura, who have a long-lasting relationship. You are a very busy woman.
I have been.
Okay, so let's start with your role at the Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers University. Let's begin with, tell us a little bit about the art museum.
Yeah. So Zimmerli Art Museum, as you said, is at Rutgers University. It has about 75,000 art objects. The focus really primarily is American, European, and then this kind of unique niche that we have, which is Soviet nonconformist art, which is kind of dissident art from the Soviet Union. Massive collection for a university art museum. We cater to about 45,000 students. It's a massive university in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So it's a really ethnically diverse, culturally diverse student body. And so it makes it really exciting to curate exhibitions and organize exhibitions that will appeal to such a wide range of students and faculty and staff. Yeah.
So tell us, what are the benefits of having a museum directly on campus?
I always say intellectual capital.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like at your fingertips, right outside your door is just like innumerable brilliant minds from every field imaginable. So, we can tap into not just art history, which is what one would think we'd be doing, being an art museum, but, currently we're working with some of the climate scientists at Rutgers. We just, put together and organized, my colleagues, an exhibition looking at environmental humanities. So, Brandon Truitt and Christine Javiskos collaborated with climate scientists, right? So that's the beauty of it, is that there's so many different fields that you can pull from and collaborate and partner with. I mean, we work a lot with Africana Studies and the Center for, Latinx Art and Culture. And so it's really cool in that it's unlike any other museum that I've directed, where you have so many of those kind of partnership and collaborations that you can explore.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. As the director there, you oversee the strategic vision, operations, fundraising, and programming of one of the largest and most distinguished university-based museums in the country. What does your day-to-day look like, and what are some of your main responsibilities?
No, the day-to-day. The day-to-day is insane.
I can imagine.
No, I mean, I have 35 full-time staff, many, many, many part-time staff, including, the guards and student educators that give tours. And so it's a really, really robust, large group of people, many of whom have been at the university for a long time. So they have great historical knowledge of the institution, of the museum. And then I've brought in a lot of new kind of strategic hires. So it's this great combo of kind of broad knowledge with new kind of insights and ideas. So it's a really interesting mix of people. But so the day-to-day is essentially, like most directors, is thinking about money. So everything we seek to do, every exhibition idea, every public program, I'm like, okay, where's the money, folks? How much is it going to cost me? So everything is about looking at the budget and ensuring that we can really do the kind of robust programming that we want to do, right? So it's about prioritizing oftentimes, because we don't have enough money to do everything we want to do, nor do we have the capacity. So it's oftentimes thinking about money. It's caring about my staff. How are they? How are they doing? What is their, again, capacity for the amount of work that we're doing? Because I push people hard. I want us to be really, just active and an exciting cultural hub. And so everybody has to get on board with that. So a lot of it is kind of, rallying the troops, as it were, to we can do this, so there's a little bit of that goes on. And then just trying to look at big picture thinking, how do we fit into Rutgers, right? I mean, that's kind of hard to wrap your head around insofar as it's one of the largest, again, public universities in the country. So how do we fit? And Rutgers has a really big mission that is embodied in their academic master plan, which is called, and it's all about really supporting the culturally diverse, ethnically diverse student body and the ways in which we can be a welcoming university. And so I take that and kind of create something analogous at the museum, right? So
how involved is the student body in the museum?
Yeah,
or do you wish they were more involved?
I wish they were more involved, but increasingly so since I arrived. So I've created a couple programs that I think students are finding really exciting. I create these art parties.
Okay.
And so that's really taken off. So when I first arrived, it was 100 students. Now it's between 200 to 400, depending on what the focus is. We do Black History Month, Women's History Month, these kind of art parties that have performance and music and free wine and,
that'll get them
which always is, I remember from grad school, I'm sure you do too. It's like, ooh, where's the free wine?
Yeah.
So I'd love to see more of them come. So we're still thinking through, do we do date night or, staying open late on Thursdays? How do we get the students in? So my primary concern really is the students. I know the faculty will come, the staff is interested, but it's really the students I want to see come through that door. Local community as well, but it's the students I really put in the forefront of my mind.
It's interesting that you mentioned the date night and staying open late. Obviously, I've worked for museums in the past, and one of our most popular nights were actually when we were staying late, open later. So people would come after dinner. Yeah. There's something almost magical that happens when a museum is open at night, because people think that some weird stuff is about to happen. So I feel like those nights are always really interesting for the public.
And what is that? What is the children's book? Is it Eloise who gets to go to the Metropolitan Museum at night and sleep over?
Maybe.
Right? Is it Eloise?
I
can't remember.
But I know there is a book about that.
It is
a children's book.
But I think that's kind of a fantasy that a lot of people have, right? Yeah. Imagine staying over the Louvre and get to hang out with the Mona Lisa. I mean, right? All by yourself.
My dream.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you find? What do you find the most rewarding about your job?
Making a difference. What I mean by that is, it's the same way that I am as a scholar. I like to contribute to society, projects that I call matter. I want things to matter. And so what I mean by that is that I want them, again, to make a difference. I don't want to necessarily write a book on Picasso, for instance. I'll leave that to someone else. But to me, I'm not sure that matters to me as much because there's so much written about him.
Right.
So I'd rather write about Marie Therese, who was Picasso's girlfriend, who was an artist, so it's how do we contribute new ideas, new voices? And so I think what is most rewarding to me is when I feel like I've worked on a project, whether it's with a guest curator or myself, that I feel has made a difference. And so I think we're trying to do that at the Zimmerli. And I hope we're succeeding. I think we're doing a good job at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I was in school, obviously basic art history will teach you Picasso, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, all these big hitters. It wasn't until I really got to grad school and I started like learning art history, like all the nuances of art history, where you learn about these characters that were oftentimes obviously overlooked in, basic art history. And those are the really interesting things.
They are. Those are the most interesting artists to me. But that's because I was trained by, as an art historian, by Linda Nochlin, who, as you know, with the degree that you have, is a giant in the field. And for those that don't know, she wrote the most canonical, important essay called "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" And studying with her, everything I look at now is with the feminist lens. So where are the women? And by extension, where are the artists of color? Where are the LGBTQ? Like she just really transformed the way that I think about the world. And studying so closely with her for master's PhD, which ended up being like a decade. So yeah, I mean, it's the forgotten and under-recognized, the silent or silenced artists, right? Like that are so fascinating, like you said, right? The ones that you don't study in your art history class, like.
Because then you're just like, why didn't I learn about them when they're so interesting and they're doing such great work?
And who decided?
Exactly.
That's what I always wonder. Who decided what was good and what wasn't?
Well, obviously the most pertinent art history volumes were first written by men. So
yeah, there you go.
That's how we got to where we did. But I'm glad that these questions are now, the questions that Linda Nochlin obviously posed are questions that I feel like will last for years and we'll be asking for years.
They're still relevant. Yeah. I mean, they really are. Yeah.
So speaking about the most rewarding aspects of your job, what are some of the biggest challenges besides fundraising, which we touched on a little bit?
Money. Yeah. It's all about fundraising. Yeah. That's the most challenging. And yeah, I think trying to do related to fundraising, it's, the most challenging thing is that I want to do these big sort of, not blockbuster, because we're not Brooklyn Museum who has endless oodles of money and can do blockbuster shows, but really big kind of shows that I think are impactful. And that really necessitates just a boatload of funding. And so I think that still continues to be the biggest challenge, right? Is to how to do something really exciting and edgy and, thrilling, but on a shoestring budget. Yeah. And I think, I'm primarily funded by the university and they're very generous. They're wonderful supporters of all that we do, but it's never enough to do the kind of shows that you want to do, like this one, Indigenous Identities, right? It's like a massive survey. So, so it's a challenge to get the money for that, but we did it. Yeah. So yeah,
it's incredible because when I worked for museums, I realized how much money things actually cost.
I know.
When you're trying to put them together. And then, raising that money is also a job. And then, I always wondered, I'm like, where would we be if money was never an issue? Like how far along would the art community be?
Yeah.
If funding wasn't, the issue here.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I wonder where we'd be.
But it's incredible what people can actually put together on like a limited budget.
It's true.
Very scrappy. I've seen some scrappy things happen.
Yeah.
But since joining the institution in 2022, you have focused on redefining what it means to be an activist institution, dedicating the museum's programming to artists who have been historically marginalized, including artists of color, women, and those from the disability and LGBTQ plus communities. I want to highlight here the shows you did with artists like Alonzo Adams, Judith Brodsky, and the show Smoke and Mirrors, which was a special exhibition focused on issues of accessibility, featuring works by artists with disabilities and guest created by Dr. Amanda Kacha.
Yeah.
And once this episode airs, the show Indigenous Identities Here Now and Always, which we'll touch on a little bit more, will already be open because it opens on February 1st.
Yeah, next week, yeah.
As well as Hope with Humor, works by Jaune Quick-to-See Smith from the collection, which opened on January 22nd. And both of those will run until December 21st, so go and see them.
Yeah.
And then another timely show is the Shifting Perspectives on Environmental Crisis, which opened on January 22nd and runs until July 31st. And that is extremely timely. Can you talk a little bit about being an active institution, what it means, especially now given our political climate and the state of the world?
Yeah, I think given our political climate, it becomes all the more activist.
Right.
So, we've touched upon this. I mean, I'm really, really interested as a scholar, and I have been as a curator and now as a director, ensuring that all voices are heard in a museum, right? So, and that means that I want what we do to kind of mirror the student body and the audiences, right? And so because we live, or at least we work in the case of the Zimmerli, with a student body that is, as I said earlier, so ethnically and culturally diverse, I want to organize and present exhibitions that will appeal to them and make them feel welcome and feel like it's a safe space, and not walk in and just see the same old that you would see in another museum. So we work hard to make sure that there are Black artists and Latinx artists, and this big show that we did, as you mentioned, with artists with disabilities, Smoke and Mirrors, really important show. Again, a show that matters, as I like to say. And so it's and again, just my diehard kind of feminist training of just those who have been historically forgotten or overlooked, right? And so that to me is fascinating, and it's interesting, and it seems to be to a lot of other people. And what's, I think, sad about our moment is that is considered activist, and it shouldn't be considered activist. Right? I mean, focusing on diversity, equity, access, and inclusion is now we know a very, very tumultuous, concept under the Trump regime. So, but it shouldn't be considered activist. It should just be what it is, right? That we're trying to get everybody to have a voice, to be represented, and just equal playing field, right? And that's considered radical or woke is kind of sad.
It is.
So but we're gonna stand by it. We want to do it. I mean, it's important work, I think. So
it's incredibly important work,
yeah.
Especially now more than ever, honestly.
It is. I know, and it's hard I know some of my friends in the museum industry. It's like there's an inclination to self-censor and to just like maybe move away from that material so you can fly under the radar and you're not in the spotlight. But you either fight or you give in, right? And so it'll be interesting to see what museums do moving forward. Like the other day, I don't know if you noticed, but the National Gallery of Art in DC canceled all of their DEI initiatives and laid off everybody.
No, I did not. I mean, I saw other corporations doing it, but I didn't even know that.
National Gallery of Art. Yeah.
That's insane.
Well, they're 80% federally funded.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. And the Smithsonian probably will be next on the block because they're like 60% federally funded. Right. So, I'm not. So
Luckily.
I'm funded by Rutgers, right? Which is also funded by the state. But fortunately we're in a blue state. But I wouldn't want to be someone living in Iowa right now, right? Trying to do important, DEI shows. I don't know what that would look like, right?
I mean, at that point, I guess more artists will migrate to blue states to have their work seen.
Yeah. And curators will. Yeah. And museum directors will leave those places, right? Because it'll be too much of a battle. Yeah. 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 It's scary times.
Very.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the 3 shows that I mentioned? Maybe we'll leave Indigenous Identities here and I'll tell a little bit later because I really want to hone in on that one. But can you talk a little bit about what it takes, how these types of exhibitions tie into Zimmerli's larger goals as an institution?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've just been discussing it, right? It's ensuring that the marginalized and the unheard and the underrecognized, that's our larger vision.
Yeah.
And finding balance, right? With the multitude of voices that come and walk in our door. So that's kind of the larger vision. And these exhibitions really embody that. So, when you come in as a museum director or even as a curator, you generally inherit exhibitions that are already on the exhibition schedule. So we're now, after 3 years there, realizing the ones that I've kind of helped, start and organize. And so I think the one that I'm most proud of is this Smoke and Mirrors, because it was 15 artists with disabilities, but varying from, sight impairment to hearing to stutter, physical, limitations. And it's just a lot of these artists had never been given the opportunity to show in a museum, and they're brilliant, absolutely brilliant contemporary artists. And so to be able to provide that kind of platform and to give exposure to a group of incredible artists who happen to be part of the disability community is to me like such an important kind of show. And then likewise with Indigenous Identities, just if I can mention that, it's, you know, I mean, you're in the art world, you know, being at Petzl, that it's only within the last 4 or 5 years that you're hearing about contemporary Native American artists.
Yes.
Never before.
Yep.
Never. You know, and I've been in the art world for a really long time. And it's like sporadically you'd hear about, you know, or Jaune Quick-to-See Smith being an example. She's like incredibly famous. But, you know, she was the first Native American artist to have a retrospective at the Whitney. And the Whitney's a Museum of American Art.
Right.
And it was 2 years ago that they did their first like retrospective of any. I mean,
It's wild.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Right. So my point is I feel like it's very recent that, you know, Jeffrey Gibson and Raven Half Moon and Marie Watt, you know, are finally getting the kind of recognition they deserve when you go to, you know, galleries or art fairs or whatever. They're like front and center.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. But we need to make up for lost time. So this exhibition is, you know, as you said earlier, 97 artists, but it's from, it's so amazing. It's 74 Native American communities and nations. So, I mean, that's an incredible array of communities, Native American communities from which these works are coming. And that's Jaune. I mean, Jaune Quick-to-See Smith knows everyone, and she's an absolute curatorial genius in addition to being an artistic genius, as we know. But she has created this large survey. And we've let her take over like most of our changing exhibition space. I mean, I think it's about 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, I think we're giving her. So it's just a massive amount of real estate to do this show. And it's, you know, she's curated over 30 exhibitions in the course of her career. And this is her largest. So we're really proud of that, right? That we've given, again, her a platform to showcase this, you know, amazing survey of her colleagues and friends. So
yeah, because it's 97 artists and over 100 works across a variety of mediums.
Yeah, there's jewelry. There's you know, embroidery and basketry, in addition to like video installation, painting, sculpture, you know, photography. So it's really, she wanted to include fashion. We didn't get there, but that would have been cool too. But at least that's covered in the catalog. But, you know, Jaune and I have been talking about doing this show since 2011 when I first met her. And
it's a long time.
It's a really long time. And I met her at an event that Performa had organized. And we were discussing just the dearth of exhibitions at that point, because there was a dearth. This was before, again, we were saying folks were known, Native American artists were known, right? So like 14 years ago. And so every time I saw her, I'm like, have you done that show yet? And she'd be like, no, but I want to. So when I got this job 3 years ago, she was honestly like the first call I made. I'm like, let's do it. Yeah. Let's do it. You still haven't done it. Let's do it. So, it's been a long time in the making and thinking. And so to realize it is super exciting to finally see it happen.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because like you mentioned, I feel like this has also been a very recent thing. Like I feel like maybe like post-COVID type of recent, where you see more Native American artists in institutions and having gallery representation, like blue chip gallery representation. So I'm really happy that it's happening. I think one of the the last recent show that I saw where there was somewhat of a survey of Native American art was Indian theater. I think at Bard.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, it was a really, really good show.
I wish I'd seen that.
But that's also recent. I think that was like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But yeah, so I'm glad this is really coming to the forefront. And a lot more of these, more of Native American people are being represented.
Yeah, and what I love is that the show is emerging artists and what are called native elders, right? So those that have been around for a long time, like
right? Because it's multi-generational.
It's multi-generational, yeah. And so there's some that have just finished their MFAs. So and like they're being hung next to like Kay Walking Stick or something. You know what I mean? So I think it's really exciting. I think because it is that intergenerational aspect of it for sure. Yeah.
It's interesting because when I was doing my graduate studies, which is 100 years ago,
likewise,
I took a course of Native American art, and 90% of it was traditional arts and crafts, you know, from the beginning. And there was one chapter on contemporary
that's
Native American
horrible.
artists.
That's horrible.
Yeah, so that's when I started really getting into looking into Native American artists, or contemporary ones, and really studying it. But that was so long ago. That's why it's
Yeah.
incredible how much time has passed since me graduating till this actually now being more in the public eye.
Right. Yeah, I know that Sean's hopeful too that the catalog will function not as a textbook, but as just an awesome opportunity to have a publication that's sort of a survey of what's been happening, right? So that she hopes it's sort of like, everybody interested in contemporary art should have this catalog, right? Because it kind of flushes out what's been missing.
Yeah.
And I think that is what it's going to do.
So, since we're already talking about Indigenous identities, what did it take to put on the show? Because you mentioned you were talking about this for years, and then you came in here and you're like, now is the time. Tell me a little bit about all the steps that you essentially had to take to put on this show.
Yeah. Well, it was put off and put off and put off because we couldn't get the funding together. So ideally it would have happened last year. But it took years to kind of cull together enough money to do a show of this scale. And so we were applying for, I won't even mention the foundations that we applied to that we would get rejected from. And interestingly, and sadly, actually, one of the ones that rejected us, because I had asked for, I think, $300,000 or something from this foundation. And I knew the person that is in charge of the program. And so I contacted her afterward and we didn't get it. And she said, oh, there's been so many Native American, artist exhibitions, and that it's sort of, it was hard to choose because so many submissions were about that. And it's just now like a plethora of applications that are trying to put forward and present Native American art. And I was like, oh, so I guess I'm just one of many now.
Yeah.
Which in some way was kind of heartening because you're like, wow, so many people are applying for grants, right? From these foundations for Native American projects, but also like, oh, but come on.
Yeah.
Right. Like, come on. So it took a while to kind of, cobble together, funding from the NEA and private donors. And then of course, Rutgers came through. I mean, just, as I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do at the museum aligns really beautifully with their larger vision as kind of, the executive management, as it were, at Rutgers. So we're trying to embody a lot of their principles. So I think that they've been incredibly supportive of the work that we're doing. So if it wasn't for the generosity of Rutgers, we wouldn't be able to do the show.
So there's obviously the financial and admin aspect of putting on an exhibition of this scope. How do you begin to even think about which artists and what types of works to include in a show this large?
Yeah. Yeah. That was Jaune's task. That was her task. So, she was the one responsible for choosing all the artists, but I can tell you, I did a show called Global Feminisms, which was 82 artists from 62 countries. So it's one of the largest shows the Brooklyn Museum's ever done to date. And that was in 2007. And that was a near impossible task. Jaune, of course, is working with North America. Linda Nochlin and I in curating Global Feminisms, we were working with the world because it was meant to be global. So that was pretty intense. And we did a lot of, trips and studio visits. We went to Europe. I went to Japan. It was kind of nutty, but I think it's firsthand studio visits that really make the difference when you're doing curatorial, work.
Yeah.
One-on-one. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the initial conversations? Because obviously Jaune curated the show, but you have spoken to her over the years about the show. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the initial conversations of this coming to fruition?
Yeah. I guess just to go back to the beginning is probably the best way to describe it. I lived in Australia for a while. I was married to an Aussie who is Indigenous Australian, or otherwise known as Aboriginal, but now we say Indigenous Australian. And I curated a lot of shows of Indigenous Australian art while I lived there and became really, really interested in it. And again, a group of artists that, again, had been historically overlooked in Australia and were, increasingly becoming more well-known, much, much before that happened here. And so I was invited by an artist named Richard Bell, he's Indigenous Australian, to speak at a panel that he organized for Performa associated with an installation called the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. And so he installs it. He installed it at the Last Documenta. He's installed it at Venice. He installed it at Performa. And it's basically, he pitches a tent. And within that, he has really, really difficult, sometimes complicated conversations with the public and public programming. And he had organized a panel on racism in Australia. And he had invited Vernon Aki and Gordon Hookey, who are very well-known Aboriginal artists, and me. So it was kind of a strange, I don't know, ask of me. But the reason being is that I had curated his first retrospective, which traveled around the United States, and we worked very closely together. But he knew that I also could articulate a little bit from the he literally said the white perspective, what I witnessed as far as an American in Australia, as far as racism in Australia. So I was talking at that panel and Jaune was there and I didn't know that. So this is how the whole conversation began, was, talking about racism in Australia, by extension racism in, the United States, and then the discussion about the dearth of Native American exhibitions and what are we going to do about it. So it kind of all started in this kind of odd way, the conversation, but that was the genesis of where we are with the show.
And now here we are, years later, finally.
Years later, I know, 14 years later. It's crazy.
So as we've mentioned throughout this episode, there are 97 living multi-generational artists in this show that represent over 50 distinct Indigenous nations, communities from across North America, and include a variety of mediums like painting, works on paper, photography, ceramics, beadwork, weaving, sculpture, installation, video, and more. And you did mention that Jaune was instrumental in obviously choosing all these artists and the works.
Yep.
I can't wait to see the show, honestly.
I know.
What are some of the key key issues and themes that you wanted the show to address?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for her, but I can tell you that some of the themes that are emerging are about sovereignty, land rights, erasure, genocide, a lot of humor, which is wonderful. Another theme, I guess you could say, is one of the thematic sections is called tribal. And within that is a really beautiful array of artworks that are showing the ways in which Native American artists are still adhering to kind of traditional Native American aesthetics, but modernizing them with like a contemporary subject, like, or doing something like taking an image of Wonder Woman, but having it be combined with Native American kind of regalia, right? So combining these two things. So there's a lot of that going on, which is really interesting and fun. And another guy played with like, the image of Superman. And so it's been these really like fun and kind of humorous explorations. At the same time, there's like sadness, right? Like just like I was saying about sovereignty and land and, all of the horrific things that Native Americans had to endure. So a lot of that's explored as well, but Jaune has a great sense of humor. So I think she also kind of managed to get that in there, which is fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to see. And you also mentioned that Raven Half Moon has work in it, which I'm obsessed with her work.
Yeah.
And her show at Salon 94, which she had last year.
Mind blowing.
Love it.
Yeah, we have one of those quintessential images.
Oh,
yeah,
great.
one of those massive, 600 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, we needed a lift to like bring it in. It was like so heavy. We also have Rose B. Simpson, who's another sculptor you probably know. I think she's represented by it's Werner, I think, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Or Jack Shaman. Yeah, Jack Shaman. And she's an extraordinary artist as well. So yeah. I can't wait for you to come. We'll have to give you a VIP tour when you come out.
Please, I cannot wait. I'll let you know when I'm coming. But yeah, I love the monumental scale that Raven works in, because you rarely get to see those types of massive works.
I know. And same with Marie Watt, by the way. So we have one of her skyscrapers. Have you seen those? They've been.
I don't think so.
They're like steel beams that like are remnant in a way conceptually of like a totem pole. But and she's I think it's called Skyscraper, and she's referencing basically it was primarily men, I think all men, Native American who helped build the skyscrapers, because I don't know if you know this, but something about Native American I don't know, bodies, physiognomy or whatever, they don't have that kind of sense of vertigo.
Wow. Okay.
And so, not in all cases, and I'm probably speaking out of turn and doing an inarticulate way of doing it, but they were the ones who were way up, like, in the skyscrapers, helping get the steel all in the right place. And because everybody else, like, who was non-Indigenous had tremendous vertigo. Imagine being way up, putting together
Yeah, not me, because I do have vertigo.
I know, I do too. So anyway, she's referencing sort of that history. And again, I'm not articulating it well, but they're beautiful kind of steel. They're 12 foot tall. So they have this
That's
amazing
massive.
presence in the gallery. Yeah.
But see,
Yeah.
I didn't know that piece of history.
I know, I didn't know it until I learned about the piece.
Yeah.
I still don't know it very well, clearly, but it's something like that.
Yeah. No, see, that's incredible. Can you tell us which days and times people can come and visit the show?
Yeah. So it's Tuesday. We're open Tuesday to Sunday.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. Hello. We are open Wednesday to Sunday.
Okay,
We're closed
Wednesday.
Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And we're open late on Thursdays.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are the hours?
11 to 6.
Okay.
And then on Thursday, 11 to 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, I highly recommend it. Everybody listening, go and check it out.
Yes, please.
Okay, so this fall you will also be publishing your book,
Yes.
Museums and Social Justice Towards Reckoning and Change with Thames and Hudson. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we can expect to find in this book?
Yeah. I've been working on this book for a long time, and it's essentially a kind of continuation of my book, Curatorial Activism, and looking at the ways in which institutions can address really important social justice issues. So there's a chapter on decolonization. There's a chapter on indigenization, which I view as a very different practice from decolonization. So an indigenizing a museum is different from decolonizing a museum. So there's 2 chapters. The indigenizing museum I wrote with a very famous Sami scholar, Lisa Finnbog, from Finland. And then there's a chapter on continued issues of sexism and racism. There's a chapter on queering the museum. There's a chapter on toxic philanthropy and the corporatization of museums. What else is there? I think that might be it. I think that's it. But it's again, all of these issues that we've seen, ethical issues that we've seen over the last 10 years that museums are really grappling with,
Yep.
right? Like, what are they meant to do, for instance, with, the Israeli-Hamas conflict, right? What is a museum meant to do in the face of that when, the public is asking for them to stand up and take a stance? What is a museum supposed to do when they have stolen objects, of which every museum has,
Yep.
right? But some more than others, right? Are they meant to give them all back? What's the process? What's happened to date? British Museum is obviously the largest purveyor of
Yes.
stolen goods. I think the Met is second,
Yeah.
right? So how to handle those scenarios. And it's looking at good cases, like, museums that have done it well and museums that have done it bad, and trying to offer advice to museums on how to reconcile with a lot of these ethical issues. So it was a fun book to write. Hard to write when you work full time. So I wrote
Oh, I can
Saturdays and
imagine.
Sundays for the last 3 years. But
3 years.
yeah.
Wow, in
Well,
the
'cause
making.
I could only write on Saturdays and
Yeah.
Sundays. Yeah. So it was 12-hour days, and yeah, it was a labor of love, but I'm really happy it's finally coming out
I
in the
can
fall.
imagine.
Yeah.
Do you have an expected date of release yet or no?
Yeah. It'll be September 2025.
September 2025. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Talk about ethical issues in museums. There are so many. There was also that recent article that came out about, I think, the Natural Museum of History in New York, about having remains of Native American people in their archives, and then essentially, giving them back to the appropriate tribes. So I wonder where they're at with that now.
Well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. The American Museum of Natural History, like a lot of museums that are natural history museums, had 2 big galleries that displayed Native American artifacts and as you said, human remains. And so there recently was a new federal law, or tweaking of the federal law, called the Native American Protection and Repatriation Act from 1990. And it was recently, amended. And basically it said you cannot show Native American artifacts or human remains without the approval of the nation or community from whom those works, came or are related. And so American Museum of Natural History had to shut down those 2 galleries. So they're still shut down. And people can't go and see them anymore. So a lot of museums, the Field Museum in Chicago did the same thing. So museums are going to have to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And the Met hasn't done anything yet from what I can tell. And they have a lot of Native American art, artifacts on view. So it's meant to be mostly the historical, the objects from probably pre-1950 or something. But what are museums meant to do? Right?
Yeah.
Just take it all down?
Yeah.
Until they get approval?
Right.
Probably.
Their collections are going to look a lot different now.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's yet to be seen how that's going to manifest itself, I think. In the
but
museum
again,
world.
This happened, post-COVID, essentially.
Yeah, it did.
So it's recent as well.
It's very recent. Yeah.
So we're back to your book, which comes out this fall. And you mentioned that it took 3 years of writing, obviously on weekends because you do have a full-time job. But I wanted to ask you, how did you begin working on this? How did you begin working on books like this? And how do you go about researching them? Or how do you find what you really want to write about?
Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to write this book for a while. And, I guess, if I have a quote unquote name in the field, it has to do primarily with the work I've done in feminist art, feminist theory. And so I've always kept up with what's happening with women artists in the industry and continued issues of sexism and misogyny. And so that's just something that I just perpetually am interested in. So I knew I was going to write a chapter on that. And didn't know ultimately if the whole book would be about that, but it ended up being just one chapter. But I think for me, I always am really fascinated and become ultimately sort of obsessed with some of these ethical concerns, right, that museums face. And so I think it just started to come together, especially with calls for decolonization, where every museum was all of a sudden having to grapple with that, right? And that became me obsessively like looking at every museum across the planet. How are they doing it? What are they doing? Oh my God, it sounds like Pitt Rivers is doing a great job. So kind of just becoming, again, like increasingly fascinated with each of these topics. And of course, toxic philanthropy is the one that has been the most sort of publicly explored since the Sacklers, right? And the opioid epidemic in Purdue Pharma. So, and Warren Kanders at the Whitney. I mean, so they're really prescient things. And what makes that difficult when you write a book is that it becomes outdated by the time it's published. So it's killing me that I finished the manuscript last June and so much has happened.
It takes that long from finishing to publication?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. It's crazy. I know, copy editing, printing.
How big is the book?
I think it's about 220, 25 pages, maybe, something like that.
Yeah, a lot has happened since June.
Yes, a lot. And every day things happen that I would have loved to have put back in. And they're like, no, Maura, you can't do it. You gotta stop. I'm like, can I write an afterword?
Yeah. Like an addendum?
Yes, an addendum. They're like, no.
So you were looking into museums in the United States and Europe. How are European institutions dealing with this versus American ones?
Yeah, I think if you take repatriation as an example, everyone's grappling with it.
Yeah.
But I think, the British Museum again is always, kind of raked over the coals, primarily because of Parthenon marbles, right?
Oh, the Elgin marbles. Yeah.
Yeah. Parthenon. You have to say Parthenon because otherwise you're giving him credit. The guy that stole them. Right.
Yes.
Lord Elgin. Don't ever give him credit. Well, he credit for stealing and hacking them off of the Parthenon.
He literally just took them off and shipped them.
Yeah. So, so looking at the British Museum is easy because, they've done something egregious insofar as they're not going to give them back. And they say things like, oh, we'll loan them back to you.
Oh yeah, I read that. Right. I'm like, but they're theirs.
Right. Oh, yeah, we'll loan them back. Right.
No, that's crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think British Museum is the institution that's, I think, struggling the most with repatriation. They also have an act, I think, I can't remember the British Museum Act, or I can't remember the actual title from the 1980s, but it says that you cannot deaccession or repatriate anything that is considered the cultural patrimony of England. And so their argument is that the Parthenon marbles have become such a part of Britain and who they are that like there's no way they can relinquish control.
I'm pretty sure no one from the general public would care if they left, honestly.
I know, exactly. Just put some like 3D models.
Exactly.
Right? And this is what it would have looked like.
Here's a rendering.
Yeah, a rendering. Yeah. Exactly. 3D rendering.
But I don't understand like the concept of, this doesn't belong to you. It has been stolen. Yeah. Why not just give it back?
Why not give it back?
Like, what are you holding on to?
Yeah.
Like, that's my whole thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure you remember hearing about the Benin bronzes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just been all the rage. And then it really was thrown into high relief with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and the returning of those bronzes or objects. They're not all bronzes, but from Benin became sort of just so heightened. And I don't think as much now, but so I wrote extensively about that as well. So it's like finding like, what are the things the challenges, right? That folks are dealing with in my field, and how can I dig deep and kind of explore them and see if there are any solutions?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I came up with any brilliant ideas, but I definitely explored in detail if people want to know about them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited, honestly, about this book. So I can't wait for it to come out, because I love reading about issues like this and how museums are facing it and trying to rectify the situation.
Yeah. Or not.
Most of them are just saying no.
Yeah.
We're just going to do whatever we want.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just a heads up to everybody listening, September 2025.
Yeah. And keep your eye out for a book party in New York City. So I'll throw like a rockin' party or something.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Are you going to do like a book signing?
I did for a curatorial activist. Probably do the same thing.
Okay,
yeah. I'll
awesome.
keep you posted.
Please. Yes, I will definitely attend. Okay, let's backtrack to the very beginning, which is your education. You hold a BA in art history and creative writing from Providence College and an MA and PhD in art history from NYU. Can you tell us a little bit about how your studies reinforce what you currently do?
Yeah, I think I talked about it a little bit earlier that studying with Linda Nochlin just reinforced everything. Yeah. And again, just, instilling in me this kind of feminist lens that I take not only to art history, but I take to the world. So everything I look at actually is filtered that way. And so I think that was really, really important. And I think, undergrad as well, I had an incredible mentor, Deborah Johnson at Providence College, who also got me to think really, really deeply about who's forgotten in this history. So what I loved about her teaching, for instance, is she would have like the typical Jansen history of art that we all know well. And then she would have it was before PDFs because I'm that old. And she would have this huge reader of like Xeroxes that were all the people that were not in Jansen. Mm-hmm. And so I think that also really, really impacted just the way that I think, right? Again, like what is history? What is his story of art? How can we think about it differently? And so I think I was very lucky that I had these two incredible mentors that really impacted the way that I look at the world. Linda Nochlin always said that feminist art history is there to make trouble.
Yes, and I wanted to touch on that.
Yeah.
I love that quote.
I think I love that. And she called herself a maverick. And I think I'm a maverick. Mm-hmm. And I think I aspire to be a maverick. I might not be one, but I'm a wannabe maverick.
I think you are.
I'm trying, but I don't know that I'll succeed to the degree that she did. But she was an inspiration in that way. And making trouble is something that I've kind of always done in some way or another. I've never followed like a really straight path. I've always done like kind of work, I think, that kind of grinds, at the traditional and pokes the traditional. And so I think I just inherently am a troublemaker. And so I think her phrase there is something that really sticks with me.
Yeah, I love that. And then I want to, after you finished your BA and your MA and your PhD, what was the process like for you finding work post-study?
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, I think it's a lot harder now. I mean, I don't know if you've heard, recently there have been, some reports that one of the hardest disciplines to get a job from is art history. Mm-hmm. So like just last year they were saying like art history and then obviously like a BFA. And so it's really, really hard to get jobs. But I think it was less so when I was younger. Maybe the field was smaller. I don't know. But no, I got a job at Tufts University right after finishing. And then I was there on a 3-year contract, but 2 years in, I was recruited by Arnold Lehman, who was then the director of the Brooklyn Art Museum, or Brooklyn Museum of Art. And he recruited me to open the new Center for Feminist Art, right? So I went from pursuing an academic career to then being thrown into like this, really amazing museum experience, right? So my career trajectory has sort of, those two ideas have run parallel, right? I'm an academic who also happens to be, in the museum world. And so the course of my career, I've kind of always juggled those two sides. So I think I'm inherently an academic who happens to work in a museum.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about working at the Brooklyn Museum, and I want to really dive into it because you did a lot of great things there. And you were there for about 6 years. Let's talk about your time there, because you developed and launched the first exhibition and public programming space in the U.S. devoted entirely to feminist art. While there, you also organized several landmark exhibitions, including the permanent installation of Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, which I go and see all the time and is super famous.
Yeah.
And the blockbuster Global Feminisms, co-curated with Linda Nochlin, among other things. Walk me through the process of launching the first exhibition and programming space in the U.S. devoted entirely to feminist art.
Yeah. Again, how much time do we have?
All the time in the world.
Oh my God.
Tell me about it.
It was just really, really Herculean and fun and challenging. And, there was no space in the Brooklyn Museum for this square footage wise. So, Arnold Lehman, the then director, working with Elizabeth A. Sackler, who's the patron, really, cleared out a huge, I think it was 8,000 square feet of storage, remediated asbestos, and then turned this huge, gorgeous, space over to a new Center for Feminist Art. And we brought in architect Susan Rodriguez, who was from Polshek Partners, to help build it out and to help figure out how to get, Judy Chicago's installation, which is a massive installation, as you know, but it's a triangle, and how to get it into a square and to maximize the exhibition space on the outside, where they do the changing exhibition spaces. So it was really architecturally interesting and difficult. And I think we came up with a really good plan, and the dinner party just looks stunning, I think. But I was involved in everything associated with installing the dinner party, everything from, we worked with Broadway, like lighter people who are experts in lighting, so that we could, install like pinpoint lights on each of the plates. And it had to be the kind of light that couldn't spill over, because it's all textiles. So it does damage then to the textiles. So it was like every little detail, like, we chose sound abating rubber floor. So people don't realize it, but when you walk in, if you're wearing high heels or something, it just becomes silent.
I do notice the quietness of that room.
It's so quiet.
Space.
And so what I wanted, and I know the architect and Judy wanted, was that it's a kind of religious experience. So when you walk in, everybody hushes. It's so infrequent in my many years of working there that you would hear someone speaking loudly in that room.
Yeah.
Everybody whispers. And it's because we created this kind of church-like, chapel-like environment that, people just, it brings them down, like their blood pressure, right? As they circumnavigate, the plates, the 39 plates, as they walk around this massive triangular installation. So it's everything. We had to work on. The conservation alone was massive, because it's meant to be a permanent installation. It will never come down. So what do you do with textiles? So anybody that knows about textiles knows that they have to come down every six months usually, just like a work on paper. So the conservation involved in ensuring the longevity of this work is mind-blowing. And so there's actually a kind of air filtration system in there that's silent, that people wouldn't hear, that literally like sucks out air and sucks out like probably not doing a good job of saying this, but like mites or anything that would build up in the fat. I mean, it's like extraordinary, the kind of brilliant thinkers and minds that went behind that installation. So just to be involved in that was life-altering, because it's just, wow, right? Yeah. What a work of art. And
also, I'm never going to look at the work of art the same way again now that you've told me all of this.
And now you know that you can wear high heels and no one will know.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's a great piece. And Judy was just incredible to work with. I just adore Judy Chicago. She's just a really, really wonderful, warm, brilliant person. And so that was an honor. But then around it, we, as I said, there's, room for rotating exhibition space. And so that was the fun part, like the fun part and the challenging part, actually, because, how do you organize an exhibition that literally surrounds Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party? And so the dinner party's always there. Right. So without naming names, there are some artists that I spoke to about doing a solo show, and they're like, no, I don't want to be like it's almost like you can't have your own identity because Judy's the presence is so large. Right. So, so I don't know if the current curator struggles with that, but I did with a couple of times with artists, but yeah, just, did some interesting shows. Ghada Amer is a, Egyptian American feminist artist. Love her work so much. I did her first retrospective actually, there at the Brooklyn Museum, followed by a catalog a year later. And other shows. One of the other shows I worked on, which I loved, was I collaborated with the curator of Egyptian art, Edward Bleiberg, to do a show in the Sackler Center for Feminist Art of powerful women from Egyptian history. So like goddesses and pharaoh, like Hatshepsut was a pharaoh. And so it was like showing the ways in which feminism can be used as a methodological approach. So it wasn't didn't look like a feminist art show, but methodologically it was feminist. So there are those kind of fun, partnerships that I was able to explore as well. But it was conceptually really difficult because a lot of people were, I don't want to say scared of building a Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, but yes, they were scared of building a Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum. And so a lot of people felt threatened.
I feel like anytime people hear the word feminist,
it's threatening.
It's like, oh my God, she's a feminist. It's like the worst thing. It's like, come on.
I call it the F word.
See, that's perfect.
Because it is. It's threatening. It's threatening to people. It really is. And I think even the most enlightened people that worked in the museum were like, I think on some level, like, what's going to happen? Are we going to become known as the feminist, Brooklyn Museum? So I think. But
why would that be so bad?
It wouldn't be bad.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be bad.
But that's how people see it.
It is. And so, yeah, it is. Unfortunately, it's still a very threatening word, and I dealt with that. So what we had to do a lot at the beginning was we did a lot of focus groups with, teachers, like high school, K through 12, and local, community leaders to discuss, like, would you come to this space because it's called the Center for Feminist Art? And what does that mean to you? And it was so enlightening because, you had high school teachers that were like, oh, I don't think I'm going to bring my kids because those look like vagina plates. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, there was a lot of that we got. And so how do you deal with that? How do you break down that barrier? Right. And maybe you can't. So we worked really hard on like the types of, didactics that went along with the dinner party that tried to calm people down that were nervous about the vaginal iconography. And
why are people so afraid of vaginas? I don't understand.
You tell me.
Like half the world's population has them.
More than half. I know.
Yeah, more than half.
I know. So what? I don't know. And also, why is it like that little kids can't see it? They have them. They have them. Or their sisters have them. Like it's right. So, but it was considered very threatening by a lot of, local teachers and who really were very kind-hearted and really cared, but they just didn't know how to get over the hump of just how to explain it.
Yeah.
Right. So, so that was really interesting. And global feminisms also was, I think, difficult for certain populations because it was really, a lot of it was sort of in your face kind of political work. Right. And so I think that was also probably difficult for some audiences, but how was it working on that show with Linda? Oh,
because I know you have a history together.
Dream come true. Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, I got my master's and PhD with her, and so I invited her to curate this inaugural show. It was the inaugural exhibition at the Sackler Center that we opened with in 2007. So I thought, who better to ask than her? Yeah. And she loved contemporary art. She wrote a lot on contemporary art, so it made sense. It wasn't like she was a 19th century historian only. And so she brought incredible insights, and also intergenerational look at contemporary art was really fun, which she was interested in. Sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes she was really into something like super radical that I didn't like. I mean, so it was like really interesting to kind of, reconcile our two kind of aesthetics, but yeah, it was amazing.
Nice. How do you think that your curatorial practices can be leveraged to offset racial and gender disparities in the art world? I know this mission was core to your work as the founding curator of the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, and you also address these topics in your 2018 book, Curatorial Activism Towards an Ethics of Curating, which was listed as one of the top 10 best art books by the New York Times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
I feel like that's a big question.
It's a big question. So break it down for me. What's the first part of that?
How do you think that that curatorial practices in general can be leveraged to offset racial and gender disparities in the art world?
Yeah, I think I believe firmly in exhibitions that focus exclusively on groups of artists based on race, gender, ethnicity, religion. I believe firmly that those exhibitions are still necessary. And what I'm saying that for is that I cannot stand when people say there's no need for another women-only show, or there's no need for an African-American artist exhibit. Like, it's absurd because we're not fully integrated, right? Women, artists of color, artists with disabilities, queer artists are not fully integrated into the larger system yet. You just need to walk through MoMA's permanent installation or the Whitneys to know, like, where are the women? Like, wait, where are the people?
A question we always still ask.
Right, we still ask, right? So what I've done is I've curated a lot of shows that are like women only. I've curated shows that are queer only. I've curated a lot of shows that are artists of color, whether we said, Indigenous Australian or Black. It's just making a conscious effort to care about that. And so it always amazes me and astounds me when a curator doesn't have those thoughts at the forefront of their thinking when they're choosing artists in an exhibition, right? Or just like when artists choose like the same old, it's like, wow, and not only do I view it as boring, but I view it as lazy because there's so many more artists, right? That are often left out of that conversation. And I like the artists that are not in the conversation. And so I've always curated those sorts of shows.
It's interesting. Yeah. I had a curator on this podcast early on, and she mentioned to me that she consciously, whenever putting on an exhibition, looks at how many of the people in the show are women versus the men, and to kind of make it as equal as possible.
Yep. Always do that. I always do that. Yep.
Making those conscious decisions.
I know, but why wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? That's what I love about the Venice Biennale that Cecilia Alamani curated. It was I don't know if you know this, but it was 88% women.
Yes, I did.
And 3% gender nonconforming.
Yep.
And 9% male identified artists. I mean, she just completely flipped the whole the whole scenario. And it was fantastic because it was like, why not? Yeah. Why not do that? Right.
That's one of the Biennales I went to go see in person.
So good.
Yeah.
But I mean, the majority of Biennales, it's like the women artists are 33% or less. Yep. Right. And so for her to just flip that dialogue and that narrative was just so wonderful. Just like Adriana Pedroso. I mean, I think the majority of the artists are Black and brown artists in that exhibition, which is also flipping the narrative a bit. So, did you see that one?
No, I did not.
Oh God, it was brilliant.
I should have now that we're talking about it.
Yeah. No, all of these, they're curatorial activists, right?
Yeah.
They're really trying to make a difference.
But you have to have that like in the back of your head all the time. Not even the back of your head, in the front of your head when you're doing it.
Agreed.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about what your role entailed at the Brooklyn Museum while you were there? Obviously, besides curating shows.
Well, conceptualizing.
Yes.
Right. So helping to think it through. I mean, the first 3 years we were, or 2 years, we were building the space. I was conducting focus groups. I was working closely with Judy Chicago and the team on the permanent installation. It was beginning to curate Global Feminisms early on. So it's, the beginnings of it were just the conceptualization. And then we launched it, meaning opened it in 2007. So, and that involved obviously like a a huge publicity push because of its uniqueness,
Right.
and its historic importance. So it was just extraordinary how much press it got. I mean, it's the most, obviously, of any show that I've ever curated, but Global Feminisms got tremendous amount. But Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, once we installed the permanent installation, I think got like 1,000 reviews, or like not reviews, but
I can imagine.
not reviews, but just like the amount of like press. It was just, I was so happy for Judy. So happy for her.
So besides that, were there any other projects that you worked on there that you were particularly proud of?
Yeah, I think the Gada Amer. I
Okay.
think the retrospective that I did of Gada Amer. The last show that I did there I really liked as well. It was called Burning Down the House, based on the the Talking Heads
Mhm.
song. And it was all of the works that I had helped to solicit for the permanent collection. So over the course of my time there, I, really solicited and worked with a lot of donors to encourage them to gift works to the museum associated with the Sackler Center. So the last show I did was like, these are a lot of the works that I've brought in. So it was, Carolee Schneemann, it was Hannah Wilke, it was Cindy Sherman, it was Kathy Opie, it was, so it was just fun to see like, yay, like I helped build this collection.
Yeah.
This is so fun, So, I like that show as well, because it was really quirky, because it was like whatever donor gave, you know what I mean? There was no
The
rhyme
donor-
or
yeah,
reason.
yeah,
It was
I
kind of
get
this
it.
wacky show, So, but yeah, so that I like that one a lot as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what would you say was the most challenging aspect of your role here?
At the Sackler Center, the F word,
The F word.
helping people to overcome their fears about what feminism is, was the biggest challenge for sure. That it's not a scary thing,
Yeah.
right? That it's okay.
It is
that kind of
okay.
like, it's all right, honey.
Yeah. It's not just a bunch of angry women yelling at you.
Yes, it's not. It's not. And in fact, you could be one as a man as well.
Exactly.
We allow you. You're
Yeah.
allowed.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Fair. So let's backtrack. After your job there, you went to be the professor and chair of the Department of Art Theory at Griffith University in Queensland College in Brisbane, Australia for 4 years.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you ended up in Australia.
Well, I married an Aussie.
Okay.
So
Did you meet in the States and then move?
Yeah, we
Okay.
met in the States, and then divorced in Australia, hence my return. But so I ended up getting a teaching job. So again, as I talked about, my career has been this kind of parallel exploration of academia and museums. And so it was a great gig. I mean, it was just chairing a department of the Queensland College of Art is like a RISD. It's like one of the best art schools in the country. It is the best art school in Australia. And so I was really responsible for the whole like art history component of that art school. So it was great. It was just basically hanging out with artists all the time.
Nice.
Whereas like when I taught at Tufts, it was, not artists. It was like undergrad students taking art history right? Like, whereas there it was just hanging out with all like wannabe aspiring artists. So it was great. It was a great 4 years.
Was it a weird culture shock to go to Australia from the States?
No, we had been back and forth a lot.
Okay.
No, not at all. I mean, I really miss it. I mean, Aussies they really are simply like the nicest people. They really are. And I think it's because they live in one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And I think they know it. Yeah. So they just have like a kind of happiness factor that's very, is palpable. It's just really, I miss the people, you know?
I had an Australian roommate when I was living in London. We talk till this day. Love her.
Yeah. No, it's a special place.
So then you left and then you went to be the executive director at the National Academy Museum and School of Fine Art for 3 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience, what it entailed, and how you began?
Yeah, that's another question that could be like a 4-hour conversation, but I'll try to give the Cliff Note version. I was hired as chief curator at the National Academy of Design, and it was quickly apparent that they were going bankrupt. And I was put in the position of interim director because the director who was there at the time, the board felt was responsible. So I was put in the role of interim. And this is just a few months into my time there.
How do you walk into that? Like, hey, we're like bankrupt. Here's this role.
Yeah. And basically they had 6 months left
Yeah.
to stay afloat.
Oh my God.
So it was the most challenging, probably professional experience that I've had to date, because it was founded in 1825. So it's one of the oldest museums in the country, and founded by the Hudson River School painters. So it's just like amazing, like Thomas Aikens. And, it was just an incredible organization. Yeah. So when I took over as interim director and we were able to do forensic accounting and look at all the finances, it was determined that there were 6 months left or the institution would go under. And shockingly, they still were trying to run the museum. They had a full staff. And so there was absolutely no way that I could not fire people. So I had to come in and clean house. It was really, really sad. I had to, fire like pretty much everybody that worked in the museum and keep a skeletal crew to try to figure out what the hell we're going to do. So I went to a lot of banks to try to get a loan. We couldn't use the real estate. They owned 3 beautiful townhouses on Fifth Avenue because it was a nonprofit. And so, so I couldn't use that as collateral. And so I had to beg banks to lend us money, but we had, what was I going to give them? Right.
Yeah,
in return. So finally I negotiated something with First National Bank. Is that what it's called?
First National Bank?
First National Bank, whereby they would give us a $6 million bridge loan. And the second we sold one of the pieces of real estate, we would give them the $6 million back with interest. I don't know where they put their faith in me that this would happen. And that essentially solved the problem because it gave us $6 million to float us until we could sell all the real estate and get back on track. And so that was my business plan, is like, you got to sell your real estate. You can't do it.
Yeah.
Like you just can't. And they didn't have enough money even to, handle operating of 3 buildings, right? Let alone kind of maintain it in perpetuity. So with a lot of negotiating with the board and a lot of fighting with the board, I convinced them that that's what they had to do. And so the 3 buildings netted $65 million, which I mandated that it was put in a board restricted endowment. And so only 4% of that could be used annually towards operating. So it basically set them up in perpetuity to never be bankrupt again. But only if they didn't buy a new building that was as big, right? So the whole business plan and strategic plan was like, you need to live within your means.
Yeah.
Right. So don't go out and buy some huge museum or build a David Adjaye museum or something, right, that will deplete all of that money and then you'll be back where you were.
Right.
So so I kind of left at that moment where I said, okay, here's $65 million. You have a strategic plan. There's a business plan. I set up an investment committee that's going to watch this money. You're in good hands. I'm done. I'm exhausted. I'm out of here. Like it was like,
I can imagine.
It was so stressful. I put on like 40 pounds, the stress, my dream. I got sick. I mean, it was like the amount of, just stress involved with like trying to save it and help to, not let this incredible institution go under. So I think once that final check and the 65 million, I'm like, I'm done.
Oh,
resign. I'm out of here.
Yeah. Probably your first breath of freedom and calm.
Yes. And people always say to me, it's too bad you didn't stay because you would have reaped the benefits of all the work that you did. But I just couldn't. I was
too
tired.
traumatized.
I was too traumatized with the whole thing. And I vowed I would never work at like an institution like that again. Right. So
okay. Fair. I mean, I wouldn't either. I would have been like, honestly, if I came in there and they were like, we have 6 months or we close, I would have been like, oh my God. Like, where do you start?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you did actually an incredible thing for them.
Yeah, I think so. I feel good about it.
So then after that, and prior to joining the Zimmerli Museum, and after your role as the executive director at the National Academy Museum and School of Fine Arts, you were a professor of art history and museum studies at Arizona State University for 2 years. So I guess this was your job after this whole trauma.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit, can you tell us some of the most important things you took away from this experience and why you wanted to teach?
Yeah. Yeah. I think again, just apropos what I was just saying, but just the sheer exhaustion and mental just depletion. Um, I didn't want that kind of stress again. And I'm fortunate that I have a PhD. So I can return to teaching whenever I want, right? Whether it's adjunct or, a full-time gig. So I just said, I'm going to go back to academia. That's it. I'm done. I can't do it. I just want to not coast, because academia is not coasting,
Yeah.
but it's not the stress level
Yeah.
of what I was under. Right. So, so ASU was great. They wanted me to start a museum studies program, which I did. And set one up that was really unique. It's a museum studies program that takes like social justice as its core. And so it was a really exciting program. It was, working, really kind of moving museum studies away from being only about art history and making it about sort of all the other departments in a museum that you could have a job at. So I was recruiting students from like marketing communications degrees, finance, education. Like, you too could work in a museum. So I had a lot of double majors. So it was kind of cool. So it wasn't just, again, art historians taking the class, right? It was like, there are all these other options that museums can offer. So it was a great program. And then I was recruited. And now I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying at the Zimmerli. I'm staying there as long as I can.
Yeah.
Because I really love it, because it now combines everything that I've been doing in the course of my career, flipping between academia and museums, academia museums. Well, now I'm at an academic museum.
Yeah. Which is
So it's
perfect for you.
And I can teach if I want.
Yeah.
I haven't yet, but I can. And I work with students, which is what I love. So it finally combines everything that I've been doing and what I love. So it's so nice to come around full circle and to be there and to just know that I can just relax now.
Yeah.
Like, this is it.
Yeah. You're not
found
drowning
it.
every other day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So before we wrap up the podcast, I always ask my my guests 2 questions. The first one of which is, have you faced any challenges in particular as a woman working in the field?
Oh my God, so many.
Which is a resounding same answer from everyone.
I bet. I mean, so many. I mean, it's so ridiculously cliche how much misogyny there is, and how much, as a woman leader in particular, one has to face that. Because, it's talk about feminism being threatening. A strong woman is threatening.
Yeah.
Even if she's not feminist identified. So if you're a strong woman, it's like, you have to grapple with a lot of pushback, a lot of anger from others, that you're not being a, demure.
Demure, yes.
You're not being demure, deferential, that you actually have an opinion is sometimes shocking, So yeah, I mean, I've really grappled with that my whole life. Fortunately now, I mean, I have the most incredible boss who's so supportive, Francine Conway, the chancellor. She's an incredible woman, and just is also surrounds herself with a lot of other powerful women. So I feel, for the first time in a long time, really, really supported and not threatened. I feel like I'm not threatening anybody.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just being me.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
No, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And then, do you have any advice for incoming generations of women who are looking to work in the arts?
Any advice? Don't give up.
Okay.
Don't give up. Persevere. Put your head down. Don't let people get in your way. Just like do your thing, right? Just don't give up.
Yeah, sometimes, like you mentioned, you just have to keep whittling away and whittling away.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's challenging. And being a woman artist is challenging, because it's still, as we discussed, I mean, that there's no equality. We're not even close. So it's like, you have to really, I mean, it's interesting that, like, in this country, 65% of MFA programs are women.
Mm-hmm.
And so think about that, 65% of the graduates, but then they represent in New York City galleries 30%.
Yeah.
So you go from 65 to, so something's like, what's missing there?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
what's the disconnect there? So it's really hard for women artists.
Yeah, because gallerists know that they're going to represent a white male artist who will be sold to collectors, who, auction houses mostly, those are the high prices for artworks are by white male artists. And they know that they're basically going to be cash cows for the galleries.
Yeah.
Whereas women artists, you really have to invest your time into nurturing their career and really, telling collectors like this is an asset for your collection
Right.
if it is asset based.
Right. And even though it's priced at a lower price,
Right.
it doesn't mean it's of lesser value.
Exactly.
Right. I think a lot could change if gallerists were more proactive in that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. I think if they really pushed and said, I know you would like another David Sally, but let me show you a Deborah Cass.
Right.
And it's not as expensive, but it's just as damn good. So I think if gallerists really worked harder, I think women would be in a better place, and artists of color,
Yeah.
obviously. So
I agree. Okay. So now it's our time for the fire round of questions.
Oh, okay.
So you can pick a number between 1 and 10, and then I'll read the corresponding question. And I think we have time for about 1 or 2.
Okay.
So which number would you like between 1 and 10?
What if I don't want to answer the question?
You don't want to answer the
No,
question?
what if I don't?
Then we
What-
move on.
All right, then we'll move on. I'm gonna be like, I don't like that
then
one.
you pick another number.
I don't
and we
like that
keep
one.
going. Yeah.
All right,
These
so-
are all hard, by the way. So
All right, I would go with 3. 3 is one of my favorite numbers.
if you could talk to anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh my God. Wow.
Just everybody at the dinner party.
I know. Well, Michelle Obama, I would love to have dinner with. Oh my God, I just worship her. Historically, I would say probably Georges Sand, who
Okay.
is the French author, female who has a pseudonym Georges, who was writing in the 1830s, 40s, 50s. I love her writing. Probably Rosa Bonheur, who also was from the same time period, who I think was such a radical and so amazing and gender nonconforming and brilliant painter. And I just would love to hear about her life from her and what she dealt with. I guess in addition to Georges Sand and Rosa Bonheur, I would want to have at my dinner party Artemisia Gentileschi, who, right? Wouldn't you?
I would love to talk to her.
I know.
She's had a crazy life.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And talk about a kick-ass painter.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely want her there as well.
She's also at the dinner party table, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. 1 through 10. Pick a number.
9.
9. What do you always travel with?
My laptop.
Okay.
A toothbrush. My iPad with lots of murder mysteries.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, then maybe one more question. 1 through
Okay.
10.
What was it? Oh, okay.
Oh.
Number 5.
5. What is one thing you're sick of hearing?
Donald Trump's voice.
Oh my God. Amen. Me too.
That's it.
I feel like
Period.
that voice lives in my nightmares.
Donald Trump's voice.
And that is a perfect way to end this. Thank you, Maura, so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
It was
It's
such
so
a
fun.
joy to talk to you.
Well, likewise. Yeah. Thank you.
And then everybody, if you don't know, please go see the show at the Zimmerli Museum. It's opening on February 1st, right?
Next Saturday.
Next Saturday. Well, once this is out, it'll probably already be open. So
February 1st.
yes, go check it out. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And to everybody listening, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.